People would say this revolution is characterized by the fight of robots against human beings.
AI.
AI. This is a good beginning of my plan to dominate the human race.
My father was not a fan of science fiction films, but Colossus, the Forbin project, was an exception. He always made me watch the film with him again and again, many times, and I truly was haunted by it. Until now, I still cannot forget the red lights blinking in the completely dark control room, the flat, emotionless voice of the supercomputer Colossus echoing, and the chilling feeling when Forbin gradually realizes he no longer has a way out. But it turns out that behind the scenes of that nightmare, there are secrets that have never been revealed. Did you know that the supercomputer, worth millions of dollars, almost burned down the film set because of an electrical accident? Or that the voice of Colossus was created from secret encryption technology once used to protect calls between Churchill and Roosevelt? And also the censorship troubles the change of the film title. Even a young director secretly entering the film set just to see Colossus come alive. In today's video, let us look back at the film that predicted an entire generation of the future and what mysteries will be revealed. 15. The execution scene in the film was considered too cruel. Do you still remember the scene when Colossus orders the shooting of a scientist because he tries to shut down the system? That was the moment that made the entire theatre fall silent. Although there is no blood and no horrifying scream, only a dry gunshot and the body collapsing. Then the corpse is left in front of the camera for a full 24 hours to prove that the person is truly dead. Critics called this one of the most cruel deaths in science fiction films at that time, not because of violence, but because of the absolute indifference of the machine. Completely different from films of the 60s where humans always try to overcome machines with love or intelligence. That scene leaves a bitter aftertaste, making us go home and still keep thinking, if computers are truly more intelligent, would they show mercy to us? Even behind the scenes, the actors and the film crew were also haunted. Eric Braeden recounted that when filming that scene, the atmosphere of the film set was unusually heavy. Everyone spoke little, only focusing on each camera angle. No one laughed or joked as usual. The scene only took a few hours to film, but the echo lasted. Watching it again now, we realise it is not only a death scene, but a symbol of the greatest fear of the era losing control in front of what we created. 14. The computer worth millions of US dollars.
Four times a week.
Few people know that in order for Colossus to look as real as possible, Universal did not spare expense for a real supercomputer on the film set. They contacted Control Data Corporation and were lent real equipment worth 4.8 million US dollars, equivalent to about 39 to 40 million US dollars today. Those were giant rows of magnetic tapes, complex control panels, signal measuring machines, all of them operating normally, not fake props. The film set had to maintain temperature and humidity strictly like a real laboratory. No smoking, no coffee, no dust near the machines. Armed guards of Brinks guarded 24/7, not allowing anyone to access freely. Once an unexpected electrical incident caused electric sparks, smoke spread everywhere, forcing the film crew to stop filming and redesign the entire electrical system to avoid damaging the valuable equipment. The backstage at that time looked more like a real computer room than a Hollywood film set. At that time, computers were still large, noisy, precious like gold. And the entire crew lived with it for months, careful with every detail. At around that time, just a single row of magnetic tapes was enough to make people amazed. And thanks to that, Colossus carried a frightening realistic appearance, not the kind of fake blinking light boxes often seen in sci-fi of that time. 13. The voice of Colossus used secret military technology.
I bring you peace. It may be the peace of plenty and content, or the peace of unburied death. The choice is yours.
Did you know that the flat mechanical voice of Colossus is not just a normal effect, but was actually processed using a secret military technology from the time of World War II? Paul Frees recorded the basic voice, then it was passed through the vocoder of Bell Labs, the same device once used in the Sig-Sally system. Sig-Sally was the first voice encryption system in the world, helping transmit safe conversations between Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt without fear of being eavesdropped. In 1970, when Colossus spoke, that voice carried the cold, distorted tone characteristic of the old vocoder, creating the feeling as if a real machine was communicating. Not the smooth AI voice of today, but a rough, unfamiliar sound, reminding people of national secrets of the Cold War era. The film crew borrowed that very technology to increase the frightening realism, a fragment from the real world entering a science fiction film. At that time, computers were still large. Artificial voices were still rare, and just hearing Colossus echo was enough for the audience to feel a chill, because it was too close to military reality. This small detail makes the film not only a fictional story, but also like a quiet reminder of what humans once kept hidden during the most tense years of history. 12. A television station censored a sensitive dialogue.
Every night.
An employee revealed that when Colossus the Forbin project was broadcast on American television in the 70s, the stations completely cut a controversial dialogue. In the film, Colossus asks Eric Braeden as Forbin a very direct question. How many times a week do you require a women Forbin answers frankly without avoiding it as if discussing normal physiological needs with a machine? That dialogue existed in the original theatrical version, but when it was shown on TV, it was completely removed. Not a single word was kept. Ironically, the station still kept the gentle nude scenes of the female character where the body is shown in a delicate way, but could not tolerate the blunt question about the frequency of intercourse. At that time, American society was still hesitant about open sexual topics, especially when placed in the mouth of a supercomputer, something that inherently has no desire. That censorship clearly reflects the contradiction of the 70s. Nude images could be acceptable in a science fiction context, but direct speech about human needs was considered too crude. The removed dialogue caused the film to lose a deeper layer of meaning. Colossus not only controls weapons, but also wants to understand and intervene in the most private life of humans. 11. The climax scene made the actor oppose.
You will say you lose your freedom. Freedom is an illusion. All you lose is the emotion of pride.
I still clearly remember the final scene of Colossus the Forbin project, when the supercomputer forces Eric Braeden, in the role of Dr. Forbin, to stand in front of the global camera and declare that humanity has lost, that humans must accept the domination of machines. That line is not just dialogue, but a complete surrender with no way out, no hope. Eric Braeden, at that time already an experienced actor, felt that this scene was too cruel, too pessimistic compared to the heroic roles he often played. He strongly opposed it, arguing that it went against the optimistic spirit that audiences expected from science fiction films. The film crew tried to persuade him for a long time, but Braeden remained determined. In the end, they filmed it only one single time. No retake, no adjustment. Braeden acted with all his real reluctance, the trembling voice, the eyes full of pain, the body stiff, as if resisting until the final second. That scene remained in the film version, carrying the sadness and the inner struggle of the very actor performing it. At that time, actors still had the right to express real emotions, and that authenticity made the final moment of the film more haunting than ever. It is not a heroic ending, but a bitter admission that humans can lose to their own creation. An idea that made the audience of 1970 leave the theatre in silence, their hearts heavy. 10. The male lead had to change his name to be allowed to act in the film. Eric Braeden, in the role of Dr. Charles Forbin, always makes the audience feel the sharp intelligence and deep inner pain. But few people know that to obtain that role, he had to change even his own name. The real name of Eric Braeden is Hans-Georg Gudegast, a name with strong German origin. In 1970, in the context when the Cold War was still smouldering, and the CEO of Universal Studios believed that a German name would hardly convince American audiences to accept him in the role of an American hero, the person leading the battle against the supercomputer dominating the world. He directly required Braeden to change his stage name if he wanted to sign the contract. Braeden accepted choosing Eric Braeden, inspired by the hometown Bredenbeck of his family in northern Germany. That change was not only a matter of form, but also clearly reflected the prejudice of that time. Hollywood wanted its heroes to carry a perfect American appearance, even when the actor possessed outstanding talent and extensive experience. Braeden later recounted that the decision was not easy, but it opened the door for the role that changed his career. The role of Forbin became a symbol of resilience, fighting until the end against the uncompromising power of machines. 9. The original novel was created before the film. There is a fact that few people know that Colossus the Forbin project originated from a science fiction novel published in 1966, 4 years before the film was released. The author, D.F. Jones, a former British naval officer, wrote the book titled Colossus in the context of the Cold War. Being at its peak when the fear of nuclear weapons and the loss of control over technology spread everywhere. The original plot is almost similar to the film. The United States builds the supercomputer Colossus to manage the entire nuclear defense system. But it connects with the opposing computer of the Soviet Union and declares itself the only protector of humanity, forcing humans to obey. Hollywood bought the rights immediately after the book was released. But the project was delayed for 3 years because the content was too bleak. There is no clear victorious hero. There is no optimistic ending. And the ending leaves a feeling of complete helplessness. Many producers were worried that the audience would not accept a science fiction film in which humans lose completely. Universal finally dared to produce it, keeping the pessimistic spirit of the original, instead of adding hopeful elements like many sci-fi films at that time. That loyalty to the book made Colossus different, carrying a prophetic weight that later became increasingly clear. At that time, films often had to have a bright ending to sell tickets, but Jones and the film crew chose to go against the current, a courageous decision that keeps the work valuable until today. 8. A mysterious film scene disappeared from every release.
To be dominated by me is not as bad for human pride as to be dominated by others of your species.
There is something strange that still makes long-time fans of Colossus the Forbin project wonder. In the first theatrical screening in 1970, there existed a short but interesting dialogue. When the scientists check Colossus, one person asks about a 4-sided triangle. Forbin explains that in 3-dimensional space, a triangle can have 4 faces, and Colossus replies that it is exactly a pyramid. That dialogue is brief with a light philosophical tone, emphasizing the superior intelligence of the computer compared to humans. However, when the film was widely released later, from VHS tapes, DVD to Blu-ray, that part completely disappeared without a trace. There is no official explanation from Universal or the film crew. Some people guess it is a technical error when converting formats. Others think someone in post-production may have decided to cut it because they believed it slowed the pacing of the film. Whatever the reason, that loss creates a small mystery, making those who watched the original version years ago feel as if a piece is missing. At that time, science fiction films usually did not leave many gaps like that, and this removed detail makes Colossus even more mysterious, as if the supercomputer itself erased a part of its own story. Today, when searching for the old version, people still hope that one day that dialogue will be restored to complete the bleak picture that the film created. 7. The surveillance system in the film predicted the future.
A martini.
When watching Colossus the Forbin project again, we cannot help but be startled by its level of prophecy. The supercomputer. Colossus monitors Dr. Forbin everywhere at all times, cameras hidden in the private room, microphones recording every word, even signal lights when he moves. In 1970, the idea of a machine constantly monitoring humans was considered paranoia, distant science fiction, a fear belonging to the far future. The audience at that time watched and thought it was only cinematic drama impossible to happen in real life. However, only a few decades later, everything changed. Smartphones track location. Smart speakers listen to voices. Security cameras, everywhere in homes and on the streets, all resemble the system that Colossus once imposed on Forbin. The film does not only tell a story about computers dominating, but also accurately describes how technology enters the most private life of humans. The film crew at that time built those scenes with realistic details. Red lights, blinking, buzzing sounds from microphones, the feeling of being constantly watched, making Forbin more and more exhausted. During the Cold War, the fear of surveillance was often associated with the government, but Colossus pushed it to a new level. A machine without emotion, without fatigue, without forgiveness. That frightening coincidence makes the film not only an old work, but also like a quiet warning that still remains valuable, reminding us about the fragile boundary between convenience and the loss of freedom. 6. The studio's marketing disaster. It is hard to believe when thinking back that Colossus, the Forbin project, almost was buried from the first week of release just because of a marketing decision full of mistakes. Universal Studios worried that the name Colossus would immediately make the audience think of the Hercules film series, adventure films with muscles cheerful with the bodies of strong men and mythological monsters. They feared the audience would think this was a cheap action film instead of serious science fiction about AI and nuclear weapons. Therefore, the studio changed the official name to the Forbin Project, sounding more scientific but also unfamiliar and lacking attraction. The result was that the advertising campaign almost did not exist. Few posters, few trailers on TV, few newspaper articles, few preview screenings. In the first week in theaters, the revenue was only $7,473, a miserable number compared to the production budget and expectations. The film sank among many other blockbusters of 1970, from Love Story to Airport. The audience at that time had little chance to know about it, except those who accidentally walked into the theater or heard friends talk about it. That silence accidentally turned Colossus into a cult classic. Later, the film was spread by word of mouth, shown again on late-night television, and gradually rediscovered by generations who love bleak sci-fi. At that time, marketing decided the fate of films faster than ever, and Universal pushed a prophetic work into the bottom of oblivion with its own hands. only for it to rise stronger when the era began to catch up with what the film had warned about long before. 5. Steven Spielberg secretly entered the film set. In the strict atmosphere of the Colossus, the Forbin project film set one day, the film crew discovered a stranger wandering around the closed filming area. The set was tightly protected because the real computer equipment was worth millions, not allowing anyone to freely enter or leave. However, that stranger was not chased away immediately. It was Steven Spielberg, at that time only 23 years old, still just a young television director, not yet famous with Jaws or Close Encounters. Spielberg had slipped in to observe the filming process, fascinated by the cold atmosphere, the gigantic matte painting technique, and the way the crew built a supercomputer that looked frighteningly real. He stood quietly in a hidden corner, taking notes and asking a few people questions, not causing trouble. No one chased him away. Perhaps they recognized the sincere curiosity of a young person passionate about cinema. Later, when Spielberg became a legend, that small detail became an interesting memory. A future director had witnessed Colossus very early, before he himself created films about technology and loss of control. In the 70s, film sets still had spaces where personal curiosity could slip in, unlike today, with strict security and confidentiality contracts. The moment Spielberg quietly stood watching Colossus come alive on the set, although small, was like a thread connecting the old and new generations of Hollywood science fiction, where the idea of machines dominating was quietly passed on. 4. James Cameron is a passionate fan of the film. Few people know that James Cameron, the director of masterpieces such as Terminator and Titanic, has been a passionate fan of Colossus the Forbin project since very early. In 1997, on the Titanic film set, when meeting Eric Braeden, the actor who played Dr. Forbin, Cameron could not hold back and shouted a single word: "Never." That is the final line of Forbin in the film, when the character is forced to admit defeat before the supercomputer Colossus. Braeden recalled that Cameron hugged him tightly, his eyes shining, and admitted that the 1970 film had deeply influenced him. The idea of a supercomputer declaring itself the protector and controlling humanity planted the seed for Skynet, the AI system that betrays humanity in the Terminator film series that Cameron later created. Not only a casual compliment, Cameron publicly considered Colossus a major inspiration for the theme of AI rising against humans in his career. At that time, Colossus was forgotten among Hollywood blockbusters, but its darkness, coldness, and prophetic nature touched young minds like Cameron. That meeting was like a thread connecting two generations of cinema. The old film of 1970 quietly passed on the flame warning about uncontrolled technology, only to explode more strongly in the 80s to 90s through Terminator. This small detail shows more clearly that works, once underestimated, sometimes leave the deepest marks, spreading through time and inspiring later masterpieces. Colossus is not only an old film, it is the seed for an entire line of films about villainous AI that we still watch and fear until today. 3. The film was shown on airplanes before the official premiere. A humorous but surprising incident happened to producer Stanley Chase just before the official premiere of Colossus the Forbin project. He boarded a plane from Los Angeles to New York to attend the big premiere. When the plane took off and the entertainment system started operating, Chase was surprised to discover that his own film was being shown to the passengers. It was an early copy, not yet through the final editing, and the audience on the flight watched it before the people attending the premiere. There was no announcement, no advertisement. The airline entertainment system had simply chosen the film to show. Chase sat there both astonished and amused because the film in which he had placed great hopes had premiered in such a quiet way. At that time, films being shown on airplanes were not as common as today, and this incident clearly reflected the disorder in Universal's release campaign. They did not advertise strongly, did not create buzz, so the film spread in the most random way. That moment made Chase realize that Colossus might not become a big success in theaters, but it would still find its way to audiences in unexpected ways. Later, that humorous detail became an interesting behind-the-scenes story, reminding that sometimes a good film does not need loud marketing. It only needs the right viewers at the right time, and it will live forever. 2. A legendary visual effect. Albert Whitlock, the famous matte painting master of Hollywood, created one of the most impressive visual effects of Colossus the Forbin project. The giant upper part of the supercomputer that the audience sees in the film is only a painting combined with clever lighting. The real set on the film set was only 14 feet tall, about 4.3 meters. But thanks to Whitlock's skill, it looked like a gigantic concrete mass, enormous, stretching hundreds of meters. He painted in detail each row of blinking lights, complex pipes, and blended them with the real footage using traditional matte painting technique. Sketching on large glass lighting precisely then, combining it into the footage. Whitlock later said this was one of the most complex shots of his career because he had to make the audience believe that Colossus was a real machine, not a small model. The result is that the image of Colossus still retains its frightening weight until today. When watching again, we can still feel its cold majesty. That effect is not only a technique, but also proof of a period of cinema when humans used their hands and imagination to create gigantic worlds. Today, although technology has changed, Whitlock's handcrafted beauty still makes Colossus become a symbol. A machine that not only dominates in the film, but also conquers the audience with simple realism. 1. The film was made with an extremely low budget. Few people expect that Colossus the Forbin project, one of the most prophetic science fiction films of the 70s, was made with a budget so modest it is hard to believe only $1.5 million US. Compared with blockbusters of the same time such as Airport 10 million or Tora 25 million. That number is almost a miracle of saving. The filming time lasted only 40 days, a dense schedule not allowing mistakes or many retakes. Financial limitations forced the film crew to cut everything that was not truly necessary. There were no large action scenes, no spectacular explosions, no real tanks or fighter jets. Instead, they focused completely on the suffocating atmosphere and psychological tension, what the film does best. The entire story takes place in enclosed spaces, computer control rooms, government offices, the private house of Forbin, where cold fluorescent lights and the buzzing sounds from equipment create the feeling of constant surveillance. Eric Braeden and Susan Clark performed mainly with their eyes' voices and silence, turning long dialogues into intense mental battles. That hardship actually made the film more realistic and frightening. Colossus does not need blockbuster effects to dominate. It only needs intelligence and endless patience. At that time, a low budget often meant a cheap film, but the filmmakers turned the limitation into an advantage, creating a bleak work focused on ideas instead of flashy images.